We opened up in Bowie, Maryland, September of 2019. We focus on assisted living, memory care, and even for folks that are independent, we provide what's called catered living. I think the thing, and my role, I should say, is in the sales and marketing. So when we have opportunities, whether it's from a rehab or a hospital or even just a colleague who says, I've got a situation, I've got someone that needs help, we seek to do, and this is, I think, the piece that Steve is talking about, more good. That is our running mantra of our organization, Thrive, corporately based out of Atlanta, is to do more good. And I love that these information sessions that Steve put together, I consider it, at least since this COVID thing started, the best hour, most informational hour of the day as it relates to getting new material and meeting potential partners or alliances. You think about it, if we were in a conference room with all the names and folks that attend, we would never be able to follow up necessarily and get everyone's card. But because Steve has graciously allowed these meetings and put them in place, and we all put our information in there, even if you have to leave early, even if you have to run to another meeting, you've got every contact in there that if you can't reach them today or tomorrow, eventually become part of your network that you can reach out to. So when I think about doing more good, we have a sister community that's located in the Black Hill area or Germantown, Maryland. But we've also got, competitors. We've got folks who do home care. I think I've mentioned his name before, Mark Ash, who does home care for non-medical services. We've got Brookdale, which is not too far from our community, a wonderful community there as well. So, me knowing each of you, especially since I'm new to the world of senior living, this was the perfect venue. And while I hate why we had to go virtual, in a way, it's been a great blessing because I got to meet Steve, I got to meet a lot of you. I look forward to meeting the rest of you. And I think, again, our mantra at Thrive, which is do more good, I know from listening to all of you speak that that's what your goal is as well. The best way for me to be able to do that is to know who, based on the situation, I can reach out to. So I'm grateful to Steve for the platform to be able to speak to all of you. And I love what everyone's doing as far as just, we didn't sit back and say, okay, we've got this virus, what are we going to do? We've had sessions that talked about emerging technologies. We've had sessions that talked about how to stay safe. We've had sessions that talked about what's working, what's not working. I mean, to me, again, I don't think I can say it enough times, this is the most informational, best hour of business related to sales and marketing of the week for me. I hate when I have to miss these sessions because I know I'm going to miss something I need.
Okay, that's awesome. Okay, well, and hopefully we can live up to that with our session today. I have to say that, like I said, some of these ideas I just kind of pull out of my hat with comments from people like Cordell, but I do think this is going to be meaningful today. So let me kind of step back to where Cordell sent me an email, and this is a week or so ago, and he was like, hey, I hear about all these challenges that everybody's talking about, especially the assisted livings, and we just put together a document that I think does a pretty good job of describing how we do move-ins. And I didn't know if you thought this is something that, we should be sharing, or, how can, kind of this get out there? And so I know you guys aren't going to be able to read this, or it's going to be harder to read. But as Cordell just said, so his company's mantra is do more good. Okay, that's proprietary, guys. And that's, to a certain extent. So that's the type of thing that everybody should have their own identity. And Tribute is, that's a cool, very, very good phrase. But what struck me is that Cordell was right. When I opened this up, it was like, wow, this is very simple and easy to understand. Resident, it kind of just sort of goes through this checklist. It tells you, what happens if a new resident has a history of COVID. All are welcome, and it sort of has this step process. And in 2 pages, it's fairly easy to understand how somebody can move into Cordell's community if they've got COVID or they don't. So the point is that, what we all kind of look at our quote unquote competitors, at the material that they're putting out, and we adapt, our own material from it. But, my conversation with Cordell is sort of like, gosh, wouldn't it make a lot of sense if we all just kind of shared what's working? Hey, I did this brochure. It seems to be pretty good. You might want to look at it. We don't want to steal anything from other providers, and we don't want to infringe on any copyrights. But I certainly, what I've seen since COVID-19 is a willingness to share much more than we have in the past. And I think that ultimately the consumer is benefiting. And so the thing that Cordell and I talked about is like, good, Cordell, your organization did a pretty good job of talking about how you do move-ins. Wouldn't it be neat if providers could come together and sort of create universal statements, so that if I'm looking at 3 or 4 different assisted livings, I'm getting the same message from each of them, as opposed to having to sort of read 4 different statements. Okay, I'm kind of babbling here, but that was the genesis of what we're hoping, one of the ideas that we can talk about today. So now, before I open it up to questions and discussion, let me kind of take this to the next level, because this is just one concept of, sort of communicating. But as again, oh, I forgot, I always put these slides in. For those of you who this is your first session, we divide the world into 3 different buckets: housing, of which Cordell and many of the people on the call represent; aging in place, again, home care, universal design, villages represent that; and resources, that could be like nonprofits, area agencies on aging, aging life care managers, and elder law attorneys. And then also, just another reminder to everybody, we try to identify the more you can identify who your clients are specifically, who your referral sources are, and who you give referrals to, the better your sort of marketing infrastructure is going to be. This is the base of the pyramid. If you have a solid understanding of this, then you can communicate to people that can give you referrals much more effectively, and you can build your marketing program much more effectively. So I have 2 slides, and then we'll get into a discussion. But today, what I'm hoping we can talk about is how can we work together as a community to, now and in the future, to be more supportive of each other and to be more supportive to our clients. And there's several ways that we can do this by category. So for example, Cordell has this great document that is very clear in outlining how people can move in and out of his community. He can meet with other assisted living providers, and perhaps we can come up with sort of this universal statement, so that when a consumer is searching for assisted living now and in the future, they sort of understand how these 20 assisted livings are doing move-ins, whether you're COVID positive or not, okay? The same could be done with home care agencies. So it's sort of like-minded categories. A great example of this is, for example, many of you know life plan communities. There's sort of a CARF. A lot of times this is done under a formal association or governing body. So like there's a CARF certification of life plan communities, and they all have sort of a standard that they apply to. But you don't need to be part of we don't need to be part of a paid organization. There might not be a paid organization that governs your category, but if you come together with some like-minded providers, there could be some synergy there. Location is really key. So for example, and again, just because Cordell's on the call, he's in Prince George's County. And so it's sort of like, hey, I'm going to band together with other providers that provide services in Prince George's County, whether I view them as competitors or not, and let's find out what can we collaborate on? How can we make life easier for the consumer in Prince George's County that's searching for something for mom and dad? Are there ways we can come together to make that easier? But also, this is where I get excited about marketing. Remember like 3 or 4 weeks ago, we talked about digital marketing and, you know, retargeting and geofencing and things like that. You know, for one of us to sort of buy a geofencing campaign, that might be a little bit more expensive than what we can afford. But what if a collaboration of providers came together and said, are you searching for senior living in, you know, Mitchellville? And here is a solution for housing. Here's a solution for aging in place. And here's a solution for resources. And sort of pulled together with a landing page to create a campaign that is now shared 3 ways or 5 ways or 2 ways, instead of paying for it all out of all out of one pocket. Certifications, as I mentioned before, I bet you anything, there's a bunch of certified senior advisors on the call. And I know a lot of folks have sort of brought together informal networks of providers. These are opportunities where, you know, figuring out what can we do to be supportive to each other that doesn't sacrifice our sort of capitalistic and competitive principles. And I think referral sources are a great thing that we can rally around, is understanding who your colleagues' referral sources are, again, without compromising any integrity of your business. So over the years, I've seen this happen quite a bit at our live meetings, is that somebody will casually mention that it's sort of like, oh, I got to go make calls to, you know, doctor's offices today. And somebody is like, oh, I've got to do that too. Why don't we do it together? And you'll get like an assisted living and a home care agency that'll team up and go out on calls to referral sources together. Camaraderie, sharing resources, what have you. And I'm interested in hearing if you guys have other suggestions on ways that we might think about. Okay, the next slide, and you'll notice I used a picture of a lady with a mask. I did a Google search for older adult with a mask, and I got this picture, tongue in cheek, but also a reminder. I wanted to illustrate this. I thought it was kind of funny because it's an older gentleman with a mask, okay? But it's also very important when we're all optimizing our Google searches to recognize that sometimes what keywords people are searching for may not necessarily lead them to the page, to our page, for the right reasons. But so here are some things that we can do when we collaborate as providers. What can we do? In COVID-19, one of the best things that I've seen is, and I'm so proud of our community, how we've rallied together to help others in need. I'll call out Kate Caldwell with Elder Tree. she's created a campaign called a caravan where, basically she gets a bunch of providers together and they form a caravan and they go and they provide treats and recognition to the workers at various senior living communities throughout Northern Virginia. And it's become one of these sort of pass it along things, is that, they challenge 3 organizations to do it. They go out and do it. And we never saw this, we didn't see this activity happening before COVID-19. We're coming together to help each other's, to help providers in a much more meaningful way. And the sky is the limit, and I hope these practices never stop. As Cordell and I had inspired, can we come up with some statements of practices? The cool thing about all this type of stuff is we can start integrating it into Sourcebook too. So like a statement of practice that on how people move in and out of assisted living, we don't necessarily need to use the state regulations. We could come together as providers and create what makes sense and what the consumer understands better. Sharing what works and doesn't work, pooled marketing efforts. I gave an example of that with the geofencing and geo-targeting as a group. I mean, again, for a lot of us, if we really look where our clients come from, they come from a very tight geographic region. If we can find other providers who also work that geographic region, there could be great opportunities there. Elevating training or certification as a group. Last week we had a call, and there was a woman on the call, and I'm Pamela Silberman, I think. I forgot to reach out to her, but she created a training platform for one senior housing provider, and she was out there looking to create training platforms for other providers. And one of the suggestions that I said is that, shoot, what if you created a training platform for 5 senior living providers and they agreed to sort of share the cost and all sort of collaborate on this platform? It would save the providers more money, and it is a new client for you. So these are just some ideas that I'm floating out there, and I'm hoping that they can inspire a good discussion for the rest of our time together. So I've been seeing that some questions have been coming in, so I'm just going to kind of rip through those here. It's let's see, Patricia Jubroff. It would be great if we could access the participants privately on chat to set up one-on-one and offer ideas, suggestions. Okay, so yeah, and I guess, okay, good suggestion, Patricia. And one of the things, just so you guys know, I'm so sensitive to the fact that I'm bombarding everybody with emails already, is that I'm trying to be careful to balance individuals' privacy and the platforms that we're using to minimize the chances that, in addition to getting my emails, that you get off one of these calls and then you get bombarded by another 200 emails or so. Patricia, I hope you can jump on this networking platform that we're going to be doing at 1:15. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because I think it may satisfy some of this networking, some of the networking challenges that we've got online. Mary Ellen Wilson says, hi, my team and I have been brainstorming ideas for reciprocating to our referral partners. What do you feel is of value to you as a social worker in a facility, or DON, or admission staff, discharge staff in a hospital? We want to be considered as an asset and a partner in the care continuum. Suggestions on how we can be of help and service to the folks just mentioned. Thanks. Thanks, Mary Ellen, for reiterating what I threw out there. And I hope that other people will raise their hand with suggestions on this that might be valuable to everybody, or type into chat some ideas. But I want to share with you a great, some of you who know me have heard this before, but I think it's worth repeating in this regard. Number one, we want to be of value to our referral sources, okay? We did a panel years ago, and we had a panel of hospital case managers. And one of the case managers made a great statement, and forgive me, I probably repeated this on one of these webinars, but she said to the audience, she goes, look guys, you guys are all bringing me bagels and donuts. That's your standard practice. She's like, do I look like I need bagels and donuts? And she rubbed her belly. She goes, that's not really helping me that much. What I need, what I can use is that if you can help me through difficult and challenging cases. And one of the things that she brought up as a care manager was sometimes they have to discharge somebody that is low income, and they don't even have somebody picking them up or money to get in a cab to get themselves back home. And so she just sort of threw out there, she goes, something that could help me is maybe vouchers for cabs or something like that, you know? And what she said is that when you help me solve a problem like that, now my ears are open and they're much more receptive to your marketing pitch. The other suggestion she had, and again, I'm going to remind this to everybody, she said, is that for those of you who are in home care or senior living, if your clients end up going in the hospital, okay, the best thing that you can do, whether it be voluntary or not, like if it's scheduled surgery or an emergency, is call case management, let them know that one of your residents is in the hospital, because sometimes if they don't recognize the address as being a senior living community, they're already planning the discharge. And if you can call them, let them know that one of your residents or one of your clients as a home care agency is in the hospital, that you've got them taken care of, you've solved a big problem for a case manager. They don't have to plan that discharge as much as they did. And so she said, now I'm more receptive to sort of hearing about your company. So I hope that we have some, oh, and it looks like somebody has raised their hand. Daniel Sanders. Daniel.
Hey, Steve, good afternoon. So the idea of being a great topic, by the way, the idea of finding partnerships and groups to work with and to leverage, whether it be geographic location, or others. I've done so much of this over the years, and I will readily admit some of it more successful than others. And where we've seen the biggest wins is when you don't force the connections. So there are some natural points of connection. The businesses, the functions that any one individual intersects with on a regular basis, those are the natural points of convergence. And if you were to do a Venn diagram, you'll find that that's where the overlap occurs. So, you know, in my case, for example, it's movers, it's realtors, it's insurance agents. Those are natural overlaps. When you get outside of the box, sure, there are moments where, you know, for lack of any other example, a caseworker has somebody who needs to get out of their home and they need to have personal property sold. It happens, it comes up, but it's not a continuous, regular thing. So the other part of that is, if you've got a good lead to give someone, if you've got a good referral for someone, you give it not with the expectation of an immediate return, but of a long-term, over the long term, those natural connections delivering economic benefit. So that's my 2 cents. You don't always get that win up front, and if you look for natural convergence, it's going to be a lot easier, and you won't get frustrated. People won't be going, well, how come I never get any inbound business?
Yeah, no, great comments. And you know, one of the things that everybody needs to remember is that when somebody gives you a referral, the risk is on them because they've got a relationship with the individual. If you don't respond or if you don't do a good job, it's not necessarily a bad reflection on you because you're not the one with that relationship. So that's important. Hey, Cordell, I want to jump back to you real quick because again, you inspired this conversation, and also, you know, when you think about sort of a segment that is challenged now and it's gonna be challenged in the immediate horizon, it's the segment that you're in, senior housing. You know,
Sure.
I mean, talk about, you know, getting hit with the left hook in this COVID, but I think especially like in your situation, not only are you in the senior housing segment, but you've got a relatively new community, so you didn't have the value, you don't necessarily have the luxury of sort of sitting back and saying, hey, look, we're at, you know, 85% occupancy, we can kind of get through this here. It's sort of like there is a need to build your community, because by building the community, you benefit the experience to all residents. So first off, just would love to hear some of the challenges that you all are facing, because I think people in our audience can potentially help collaborate around you, but using you as an example of other senior housing providers that are out there.
Sure. I think, you know, the biggest challenge, and I remember I learned this when I first got involved in sales, was someone said, I believe it was a Zig Ziglar tape, that tells you right then how long ago it was, because I said tape, but that he said that always sell the sizzle, not the steak. That term has a different meaning now, because one of the values that we offered was the ability to come in for a physical tour and visit within the community, and that loved one or caregiver or referral agency could see what we were talking about. Well, now we have to really put on our descriptive hat and be able to paint the flavor of what life in our community looks like, because right now regulations say no one can visit the community. So our ability as a sales representative or marketing representative to give that caregiver the comfort level that the person that's moving in is coming into an environment that they may, for the foreseeable future, never get to walk into, other than the person moving in because of the current regulations. So I think that, you know, from a sales perspective, what we always have to remember is the ability, or how we can paint the picture of our communities or our services, particularly since it's going to be virtual. It's one thing to do a virtual tour, but it's another thing to say, okay, well, what does mom or dad's day look like? And one of the things that we focus on at Thrive or at Tribute at Melford, where I'm at in Bowie, is giving them a comfort level as to this is what their life will look like. This is what it will be. And we paint that picture sometimes using actual pictures, virtual videos, events where we've got the clear panels where if mom or dad wants to visit or talk with a family member, they can actually come to a particular area in the community, and the family member can sit on the opposite side of that glass and be able to converse with them. For others, because of their needs, it may be done virtually. So I think, you know, to answer that question, the challenge is we have to do a better descriptive job of explaining what life is like now. You can't rely on the fact that they are going to walk into your community and be very impressed. You really have to know the ins and outs as to, you know, what you have to offer. Of course, the fundamentals of selling are understanding what their needs are and why they're calling you that day. But, you know, the going back to doing more good pieces is important as well. We have, as part of our lead generation, a group that we work with, and sometimes the leads they provide are not a good fit for us. Some of the parties that are on the calls that we're on now with positive aging, some of those folks have received some of those leads because they weren't a fit for what we were doing. The people maybe were calling in, they were looking for traditional housing versus senior housing. So again, it's just thinking on your feet, selling the sizzle instead of the steak, understanding that these families are going to have a need. And I love that we as a group are collectively preparing for the future as opposed to waiting for that being, decided for us. We're forging that path ourselves.
Hey, out of curiosity, like, and I'm not, so the types of people, can you sort of, because I know there's hesitancy out there in the marketplace. I'm just kind of curious, what is sort of the profile of the inquiry calls that you as a typical assisted living are getting in terms of people that are inquiring now in the middle of all this? Are they planning for the future, or have you had some urgent calls where it's sort of like, look, I know it's not ideal, but I need to move in, or mom needs to move in now?
Yeah, no, great question. We've had both. We're able to do move-ins now, and we've been very fortunate that we've not had any incidents of positive or COVID positive in our community. So it makes it easier because that first question is typically, mom or dad has reached a point where we need to do something and we need to do something now. And the question they ask point blank is, how is your community doing? And so we're very forthcoming. We will say to them, here at the Bowie location, we've been very fortunate. We've not had any incidents, but, as an organization, we have had COVID in some of our communities. And we know that it's a very real possibility. So we explain to them, if that does occur, what our procedure is. And we explain to them, for those communities where it hasn't occurred, what our procedure is. The purpose in simplifying the Do More Good and simplifying the move-in guide was so that our referral partners or a family member could hang up the phone and know, okay, this is what it takes. I just simply have to get mom or dad a test. If that test comes back negative, I know when they move into the community, they're going to have to go into a quarantine period. Right now in Maryland, it's 14 days. So after the first 7 days, they're going to take another test. And if they've had 2 negative tests, 7 days later, they're able to move freely about the community. In the interim period, we're talking about what life's going to be like. They're going to be enjoying in-room dining, in-room activities. They'll be able to go outside. So a lot of their questions are, again, what will life be like for my loved one that I'm entrusting to? And I think the more honest that we are, the more we recognize that the concern with COVID, even though we're 2 months in now as a group, we're all still learning, and we are trying to make the best the best personal decision or family decision that we can, but at the same time, keeping in mind that it is a business organization. So we try to do what we think will be best for the community, not necessarily just best for Thrive.
Great. Thanks. And okay, so let's get to some of the questions here. And again, feel free to raise your hand if you want to chime in verbally. Jennifer Brown, ALCA, the Aging Life Care Association, holds weekly calls that are working on new practice standards for social workers. While they are competitors, they're working together to agree on the new best practices in the age of COVID. Great example, Jennifer. And, the one thing that I would illustrate here is they're meeting under the umbrella of the Aging Life Care Association, which, if we are a member of a trade association, while that's pretty easy, because it's sort of like, hey guys, let's organize this. where it gets challenging and where we have to start thinking outside the box is it's sort of like, okay, I'm an assisted living provider in Montgomery County, and and I'm in a small residential home. I have 10 beds or less. Let me reach out to some of these people that I have viewed as competitors, and maybe we can collaborate and share some resources, because we're going to have to do it. We have to look unified as an industry in front of the consumers moving forward, or else it's going to make their decision making a lot more difficult. Susan Rannick says, please mention Barbara Putnam of Fox Fox Trail and her COVID call. This is a great example. And if you guys go to the event calendar of Pro Aging, you'll see that this assisted living provider called Fox Trail, early on in this COVID-19, they created this regularly scheduled COVID call, and they invited everybody on the call. And regardless if it's their quote unquote competitor or not, and they were being extremely transparent on the phone with the challenges that they're going through as a provider, and their intention is that their competitors and everybody would sort of share resources on those calls. And I think it was a great effort along these lines of what we're talking about. Let's see. And then, okay. Yeah, so just Susan has really commented on how they took such a leadership position in that case. Let me call on Isabel. Isabel, your hand was raised. Isabel?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Well, I just had a question which I put in the Q&A. I think it's important for us to partner with the patient advocates because they are working extremely closely with the seniors and the families, both in and out of the facilities and in the hospitals. So I think that as a group, everybody here should remember that there is a very dedicated cadre of folks that are patient advocates. Some are former nurses, some are former current doctors, and some are from other backgrounds like myself, medical sociology or journalism or health communications, and they work very closely with the families. So I think collaboration with patient advocates would be very beneficial. If anybody wants to connect with a Mid-Atlantic Patient Advocates group, you can contact me. And my contact
so I was just going to say, are you a patient advocate?
Part of what I do is patient advocacy. I am not one of the, I'm not certified, but I do attend almost all their meetings and I respect them hugely.
I tell you what, and again, this is just, another great example of how good ideas can kind of come out of everybody participating on this call. I think what would be a valuable online discussion for us would be maybe a panel presentation of some different patient advocates sharing with us all, some of the challenges that their clients are facing in entering the hospital in this stage, and sharing some solutions. And obviously hiring one of them is a solution, but oftentimes I found if you sort of take these, if we do a panel presentation, it turns into an educational forum. But so if you don't mind emailing me offline, and then I'll work on trying to put that together. I think I don't think enough awareness has been made of patient advocates, and they're oftentimes, because of that, it's difficult to find one, so.
Oh yeah, no problem. I'll send you the information.
Okay, great. I appreciate that, Patricia or Isabel. Okay, let's see. Okay, Brian Miller says, Steve, I have found Networking events are groups that line up people in different buckets for maximum exposure is the most efficient and effective. Brian, to a certain extent, I agree, because you can be in a networking group and not feel like you're giving a direct competitor some sharing trade secrets or what have you. Janet Grizz says, family members of stroke survivors who are now in rehab or extended care facilities cannot visit them during the pandemic. They requested ideas on how families can support stroke survivors who reside in facilities, especially those with limited mobility, communication skills, and cognitive abilities. Great comment and challenge for everybody on the call is that if you've got some creative solutions, definitely post them in chat. And one of the things that I want to share with you guys that myself and my editor are collecting now is sort of the vision for Sourcebook moving forward. In the immediate horizon is to be telling the stories of these creative ways that families are coming together, that the community is coming together to create a supportive environment when their loved ones are isolated. I know we are all sort of we're all dreaming about the same thing when we look into the crystal ball, that someday that things are going to open up, that families can move freely in and out of our communities and life will resume relatively close to normal, but I think there's an awfully good chance that we may open things up and get back to normal, but then it could be this virus, it could be another virus, it could be something that happens that puts us back into this sort of quarantined state. And so I think these creative ideas, like the caravan, like the guy that got the bucket truck and pulled into a parking lot so he could visit his mom on the 3rd floor, that community groups that are playing music and making masks for communities, all of these ideas are great, and we've got to spotlight them. And so for Janet's question, share ideas here on this call, but by all means, send, if you've got some creative things, we want to put that in the forefront. So just wanted to let you know that. Okay. Susan Rannick, again, reminds me what helps us come together as a community of providers is knowing, liking, and trusting the people that we're working with. And so working on ways, remembering that this is not all about business and commerce, that this is about building relationships, and out of those that you will potentially benefit your organization. And Bonnie Elliott is bringing up, would communities consider allowing in, with testing, etc., a virtual assistant, volunteer to come in and help the residents connect to the family with technology? This would allow caregivers to do direct care that they need. Bonnie Elliott, great question. So the concept is, as we are moving into this communication, organizations like Bonnie's and Brian's that can help with technology, is there the possibility that a screen technology assistant could come in and work? And let me jump to Cordell, since I've got him here. Cordell, at your community, and other folks, raise your hand if you can comment, but Cordell, at your community, like, are sort of third-party home care providers allowed in, or third-party volunteers that are not employees of Tribute? Are they allowed in your community, or is it at this point in time exclusive to the paid employees and residents that are a part of the community.
Right. It's the right now, based on the governor's orders and recommendations, it's just essential personnel from our community. But that's where these meetings that you're hosting have been so helpful, because I think over the last 30 days, maybe a little longer, there have been different technologies that were introduced. So what I was able to do was take that information, meet with our community president or meet with our corporate groups and say, listen, here's a technology, barring HIPAA or whatever regulations we have, is this something that we could maybe test or use in our community? Right now, for families to connect, particularly for loved ones that may have some physical challenges, we rely on what most communities would call their activity person to do that. And we do a lot of different things to make that happen. But those emerging technologies, I learned about them on these calls. So my ability to go to someone and say, hey, listen, the challenge, since this COVID piece is going to be with us for a while or the foreseeable future, is there a better way to do what we're doing that engages families, that engages the loved one, and that's safe? Because, of course, the concern of introducing technologies, the first thing everyone wants to know is it hack-proof, or is it something that we can control to make sure it's used properly? And, so yeah, absolutely. For right now, with it being strictly essential only, the ability to be aware of these technologies and introduce them, I think, is the key.
Great. Thanks for sharing. And we are getting close to 1 o'clock, and I wanted to remind everybody on the call that I'm trying to test out a platform at 1:15 to see if it can better meet sort of the networking goals that we may have, to see if it's an alternative that we might present, periodically, to help us network and connect with each other one-on-one better than our sort of chat box on these calls. And so I put a link to the sign up in the chat. If you've got some time at 1:15, go grab a sandwich or get fill up your coffee or water and try this thing out. And then if you do it, send me an email and let me know your thoughts. And I want to share that with the CEO. I've been talking with him one-on-one about our group and what we're trying to do, and he's eager to sort of help us meet our needs there. So I know it's a few minutes before we normally get off, but I'd like to kind of wind down and sort of make a last call. If you want to say something, raise your hand. We got through all the typed in questions. I hope that today was thought-provoking. I mean, when we do these marketing mastermind calls, it's not always something really specific, like here's how to do digital advertising or email. I think sometimes just thinking about the broad topic, and I personally have been in this business for 30 years. I've never seen our provider community come together the way that we have during COVID-19. And this is really a good thing, but I think we're just scratching the surface, is that as we come together, and if we all have an open mindset, and if we're creative and open to an open dialogue, the sky's the limit on what we can accomplish. Okay, let's see. Ken Silverstein and Mark Ash have their hands raised. Ken?
Hi, everybody. I was just going to concur 100% with what Cordell has been saying because we have 10 houses. One thing that I have been surprised about, we have almost the identical protocols that Cordell has in terms of allowing new residents in. One thing that I've been impressed with and pleasantly surprised with is how the public has appreciated the protocols and also all the things that we've done, like no visitors, etc. So I think there's it may go unsaid, but there's a lot, I think there's more respect for us out there for doing these things than not doing them. I know particularly with our families that we've been in a no visitor since early March, they appreciated us doing this. So I just kind of wanted to share that insight.
Thanks, Ken. And I agree. Like a great example, and I'm clicking on Mark Ash. He's got his hand raised. But one of the best examples was Falcons Landing. One of the first communities that was out there that really got hit hard by COVID. And instead of kind of trying to hide that, they did a press release. They got out in front of it, and the community of their families and the neighborhood around, it was amazing the support that they came out with. And Cordell talked about this, and Ken too. I think just being open and honest about the situation is, the public does understand this, so not trying to hide this stuff is super important. Hey, Mark, did you have something you wanted to share?
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Hope all are well. Mark Ash with Right at Home. I just wanted to throw out perhaps the way that we can carry this conversation a little bit further is if we look at a scenario. Let's take an example of create a type of family that might, or family member that might be moving into a community like that, and look at it from the perspective of how we can all contribute specifically in that scenario with, Daniel Sanders' business and the assisted living community and the care, the care coordinator and everybody else. And maybe we just create a couple of scenarios on a call like this, and we all go through, because not everybody has a sense of how each business can contribute to the needs of that client, both while they're in the community and then once they move into an assisted living community.
I love that idea, Mark. And what I would say is, if 2 or 3 people, or if you've got a challenge, like we see this on the Pro Aging Online community, for example, early when we launched that, one of the providers, she might be on the call, brought up, getting the car keys away from somebody who was truly dangerous. And it was really interesting to hear all the suggestions. And so maybe we could try that out on one of these webinars this week, one of these weeks, where 2 or 3 of us just have a challenging scenario that we throw out to the group and get feedback. All right, guys, I'm gonna wrap things up because it's 1 o'clock. Susan picked up part of our language here, and she brought up creative and courageous. And I think that could be a really cool mantra for our provider network, is that we're being creative and courageous. Thank you, Susan, for bringing that up. I'm going to end the meeting, but I really hope that you guys will jump over and test out this networking platform. I just, if we can get a handful of you to try it out, then we can maybe release it to the population or tie it in somehow to these meetings. Thanks so much, Cordell. I appreciate you inspiring this today, and I'll look forward to seeing everybody at one of the next meetings. Thank you.